Good morning, everybody. Glad that you're here. I've got a question for you this morning that I really want you to think about, maybe discuss it with your family, with your spouse, but it's a really, really important one. Here's what I want to challenge you to do. Even now, while we're kind of cloistered at home and most of us have a little more time on our hands, I want to challenge you to start thinking about and start making some proactive decisions about what you want life to look like when things start to get moving again. What is your new normal going to look like for having gone through this thing that we're going through? I found that if there's one thing that crises do, especially this one with the double whammy of the healthcare as well as the financial scares, that they make us evaluate life and priorities. They make us perhaps wish we'd been doing some things differently. Maybe we'd planned to do some things we didn't do, or maybe we were doing some things that we should have stopped, but we just kind of evaluate our lives. And I want you to think about your life and what changes would you like to make? What kind of things do you now realize that maybe you should have been doing differently, or shouldn't have been doing, or maybe you should have been doing? You see, we tend to make all kinds of well-intentioned decisions and resolutions when the heat is on. Kind of like bargaining with God. God, if you'll just get me through this, then I promise I'll do whatever. But we often don't follow through. After 9/11, people were flocking back to churches, and that was great. The number of people in worship and reading the Bible and seeking God skyrocketed, and we pastors, we were so excited that maybe out of the ash heap of that tragedy would come a renewed passion for God. But it didn't last, and it wasn't long before everybody got back to their lives. Now, I realize that this is a little bit different. Nearly everybody on the entire globe has been affected by this in some way, whereas 9/11, yeah, we were affected, but not directly. But because of this, we won't be the same. But hopefully we can come out of this better, more focused on things that really matter, more determined to follow Christ, more aware of maybe how materialistic we were, or how just addicted to safety and comfort we are. And so what I'm saying is that right now, while we're still going through this, think about what you want to do differently in the new normal because of what we're going through now. It's so easy to get through something like this, then breathe a sigh of relief and go get 5 packs of toilet paper just because you can, and then sort of move on and forget how we're feeling. So decide now, think about it, discuss it, and then follow through when the heat is off and we begin to move on with life. It's so easy to forget things. This was the pattern with God's people in the Old Testament. They would repeatedly get in a mess. They would get desperate. They would fall away from God. And then they would cry out for Him to save them. And He would, but they would forget. And they would do the same things again. That's why God was always telling them to remember what He had done. In Joshua chapters 3 and 4, the Israelites are crossing the Jordan River to get to the Promised Land. And the Jordan was at flood stage when they were trying to cross over, but the Lord stopped the water so that they were able to cross over and get there. In chapter 4, when they had crossed over, God told Joshua, choose 12 men, one from each tribe, and tell them to take 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan River they had crossed. And he said to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? You tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off and that we crossed the Jordan. And God was the one that did that. And these stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever, so they don't forget. They don't forget. After you've been in the Promised Land, after you're going on with life, after life is good, don't forget to remember how you got there and who got you there. And don't forget to tell your children about it. Don't forget. And yet they did. They did. Several generations came and went, and we get to 2 Kings chapter 23. One of the very few good kings that they had, Josiah, he decided to fix up the temple and to restore the temple. And when they were doing that, they found, as we would say, they found a Bible kind of stuck in the walls that people had forgotten about. And so somebody brought this, the priest brought this book to King Josiah. And in 2 Kings 23, Josiah says that he read it and he tore his robes and mourned because he realized how far they had gotten from God, how far they had drifted from God. And so in 2 Kings 23, Josiah calls together all the elders and the priests and the prophets, and he read out loud from the Bible they had discovered. It said, "The king stood by the pillar in the temple and renewed the covenant in the presence of the Lord, to follow the Lord, to keep his commands with all of his heart and with all of his soul. Then all the people pledged themselves to the covenant." You know, interestingly, Bible reading is way up these days as measured by the most popular Bible app, YouVersion. Around Easter time, Bible reading through YouVersion was up 54% from recent years. Verses that were shared by people, the number of those increased by 30% over about this time last year. And that's awesome. And that is awesome. But my question is, what'll happen when we get through this crisis? Will the Bible get lost in our lives to collect dust? Will we just go back to business as usual and say, "Yeah, God, thank you for what you did, but I've got all the stuff to do"? I'm challenging you to just make sure that some good in your own life comes from this horrible thing that we're going through. Let's make some decisions right now while we're still kind of in lockdown, and let's figure out what we want our new normal to look like before we all get sprung. So here's what I want to challenge you to do, and it might sound kind of stupid, but I think it's a good idea. I want you to think about this question about what changes do you want to make in your life? What do you want your life to look like? And I want you to write it down. I want you to write down how you've been feeling now, how anxious or nervous or scared or whatever it is, and then write down some things that maybe God has spoken to your heart about how you need to live, and maybe some changes you need to make, and maybe some priorities that you need to clarify, or whatever it might be. And then I want you to write those down, and I want you to put it in an envelope and seal it. Put it somewhere where you won't forget. And then, kind of like they found the Bible when they were restoring the temple, I want you, let's say next Easter time. I think that's a good time frame. Next Easter time frame, get that letter that you are writing now, that you've sealed up, and open it up and read it. And hopefully by that time, when we're down the road from this, you'll read that, and you will have made some of these changes. You will have evaluated your life and acted upon it. I'm reading a book now called Your Future Self Will Thank You: Secrets to Self-Control from the Bible and Brain Science, a guide for sinners, quitters, and procrastinators. That's a great title, but the main point, your future self will thank you. I'm asking you to write a letter to your future self. So in a year or so, you can open it and you can see if you followed through on some of these things that in the crises you decided. When times are better, when you're in the promised land, so to speak, write it down, put a copy of it in this time capsule envelope, and then around next Easter, open it up and read it. And hopefully when you do that, when you as your future self read this letter, your future self will say, "Hey, well done. You've made some great changes in this last year. Good job. Keep it up." The main point is, let's really evaluate our lives, evaluate our priorities, and decide what things we might need to change when this is done, and then act on it, because your future self will thank you. You're back here on Monday. All right, have a good weekend.